A vast southeastern part of the Asian continental shelf was exposed during the last glacial period, geologically named as the Sunderland. The last glacial period, or popularly known as the Ice Age, was the most recent glacial period within the current Ice Age, occurring during the last years of the Pleistocene geological era, from approximately 110,000 to 12,000 years ago. The Sunderland included the Malay Peninsula on the Asian mainland, as well as the large islands of Kalimantan, Java, and Sumatra and their surrounding islands. In the last glacial maximum approximately 21,000 years ago, the sea level was lowest at about 120 meters or 400 feet below today. The eastern boundary of Sunderland is the Wallace Line, as the eastern boundary of the range of Asia's land mammal fauna, and thus the boundary of the ecozones. Sunderland is in the tropics, surrounded by oceans, and within the Ring of Fire, where a large number of volcanic eruptions occur. Benefiting from the heavy precipitation, volcanic deposits in Sunderland develop into some of the richest forestry and agricultural lands, and develop into some of the richest fauna on Earth. The Out of Africa hypothesis is a theory that argues that every modern human being is descended from a small group in Africa, who then dispersed into the wider world. This hypothesis depends a lot on the genetic studies, combined with the fossil, archaeological, and climatic data. In this hypothesis, our modern species was originated in East Africa by 195,000 to 160,000 years ago. Most versions of the southern dispersal hypothesis suggests that modern humans with a generalized subsistence strategy based on hunting and gathering coastal resources left Africa between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, and traveled along the coasts of Arabia, India, and Sunderland, arriving in Australia by 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. The evidence that humans had reached Sunderland from 80,000 to 50,000 years ago are, among others, the Kalau caveman dated to 67,000, Kabong caveman 47,000, Nyack caveman 40,000, Muros cave paintings 40,000, GB tools 33,000, Gunan caveman 80,000, Gunung Padang pyramid 25,000, Ladahare caveman 73,000, Kota Tampan tools 31,000, Langrongrian tools 38,000, and Hohabine tools 38,000 years old. Also shown here the ancient Mount Thaba, where its mega eruption 74,000 years ago had multiple effects on the biosphere. It has been linked to a genetic bottleneck in human evolution, which may have resulted from a severe reduction in the size of the total human population due to the effects of the eruption on the global climate. The existence is also evidenced by the distribution of rock paintings. Most of these paintings are estimated more than 10,000 years old. Only one place that have been carbon dated, that is in South Sulawesi, to about 40,000 years old. Some of the paintings depict boats. These suggest that they already had the technology from the very ancient time. The ones in Maros were carbon dated to about 40,000 years old. The Out of Sunderland migration model argues that the origin of the Austronesian speakers is in the islands of Southeast Asia, based on mitochondrial studies that show high levels of genetic diversity. Ideal climatic conditions and natural resources for development were found in Sunderland. After migrating from the semi-deserted savannas of Africa, man first found a place where food was abundant, and it was there that they invented farming, agriculture, trading, and civilization, which made humanity first flourished. A striking thing that can be observed in this model is the dispersal of population to the other part of the world about 11,000 years ago. An unusual event was happened here. The event is detected from the observation data. A very clear indication is from the Greenland ice layers. The change of the world temperature made the ice on the North Pole to melt and the sea level continued to rise. Cracks in the Earth's crust as the weight of the ice shifted to the seas could set off catastrophic events. The Younger Dryas period is one of the most well-known examples of such abrupt change. As we can see from this graph, there were sudden changes of temperature. The most significant one is at the end of the Younger Dryas period. The ending time of the Younger Dryas period corresponds to the beginning of the Holocene period, which extends to the present time. In archaeology, the end of Younger Dryas is also the end of Paleolithic and the beginning of Neolithic ages. The Neolithic encompasses the growth and impacts of the human species worldwide, including all its written history, development of major civilizations, and overall significant transition toward urban living in the present. The phenomena is also detected from observation data in the other places on Earth. On the left graph are observations at Geological in Venezuela, in the Antarctic, and the Laurentide meltwater flux in North America. On the right graph are the changing of carbon dioxide and methane gases contents observed in the West Antarctic ice sheet. A study by Carmen et al. In 2015 shows a graph of the Y chromosome distribution against time. As we can see from this graph, there was a sharp decline of population began at the end of Younger Dryas. We can see also a striking thing here. It seems that there was a population shift from Southeast and South Asia to Europe, Near East, and Caucasus. We can see that the population of the Andes also began after the Younger Dryas period. The abrupt change occurred at the end of the Younger Dryas period, around 11,600 years ago, triggered cracks in the Earth's crust to move, as the weight of the ice shifted to the seas, that set off cataclysm. Earthquakes, volcano eruptions, superwaves and floods engulfed the coastal cultures and all the flat continental shelves of Sunderland, and wiped out many populations. As the sea rolled in, there was a mass migration of the survivors from the sinking continent. The red stars are the archaeological sites probably related to catastrophes and population dispersal around the Younger Dryas period. The cyan triangles are the legends, myths, or tales almost similarly documenting memories of their origins. The lines with arrows are the approximate population dispersal around the Younger Dryas period according to genetic studies connected with archaeological evidence, legends, myths, and tales. From the legends, myths, and tales, Sunderland has many names, among others are Garden of Eden, Paradise, Deoman, Nippur, Nisr, Nazursur, Tonetjer, Land of Punt, Land of Ophir, Atlantis, Kumarikandam, Pondia, Kangdes, Tolan, and Sowan, Taprobana, and Golden Persianese. Now, we will talk about Atlantis. The story of Atlantis comes from the Socratic dialogues, Timaeus and Chryses, written by Plato in about 360 BC. In the dialogues, Plato describes that Solon, one of the 7 sages, an Athenian poet and a famous lawgiver, had been to Egypt where priests talked about the story of Atlantis, which was inscribed on a pillar in their temple. Atlantis was told as a real story, that destructed in a night and a day, 9,000 years before Solon, or about 11,600 years ago. This accurately coincided with the cataclysm at the end of the Younger Dryas period. Plato mentioned that the island of Atlantis was beset by an earthquake and a flood, and then gradually sank into the sea. In some other his explanations, it is implied that the flood was coming from the sea, so the possibility is a tsunami. Plato did not recognize tsunami, so he equated it to flood. Earthquakes and tsunamis are very often correlated. The island was then gradually sank into the sea, means by the sea water rise during the post-glacial period. Solon, while wrote his poem, inquired into the meaning and knowledge of the names, which had been translated into Egyptian, when copying them out again, translated them into Greek. Thus, the names in the Solon story were borrowed from the Greek myth for the Athenian people to understand. The Atlantis story has the following timeline. Sometimes before 10,000 years before Solon, the Athens was founded. Sometimes before 9,000 years before Solon, the Egypt was founded. Shortly before 9,000 years before Solon, the regions from Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrannia were conquered by Atlantis. 9,000 years before Solon, a war between Atlantis and the Athens took place. 8,000 years before Solon, the Egyptians recorded their sacred registers. Between 9,000 years before Solon and Solon's time, many great deluges and land subsidence took place. About 600 BC, the Egyptian priests told story about Atlantis to Solon. About 360 BC, Plato wrote the Timaeus and Critias. Ever since the first recorded history of Atlantis, written by the Greek philosopher Plato over 2,300 years ago, debate has raged as to whether or not Atlantis ever really existed. The existence of Atlantis is supported by the fact that it is described in great details by Plato. In addition, various conditions, events, and goods unknown to Plato are also described in detailed and lengthy words. Plato himself asserts that it is a real story. There have been many locations proposed for the location of Atlantis. One of them is in Sundaland or Indonesia. The first suggested linkage between Atlantis and Indonesia came from the leading theosophist, C.W. Leadbeater, and the Lieutenant Governor of British Java, Thomas Stamford Raffles, in the 19th century. One of the first researchers to Atlantis there, in the mid-1990s, is the American polymath William Lauritsen. The concept of Sundaland Atlantis was given a huge boost by the publication of the late Brazilian professor Araciones dos Santos's book, Atlantis, The Lost Continent Finally Found, in 2005. The prehistoric flooding of the Sundaland region is covered extensively by a pediatrician and geneticist, Stephen Oppenheimer, in 1998. The Atlantology of Sundaland hypothesis is also flanked by the studies of the geologist and geophysicist, Robert M. Schoch, together with Robert Aquinas McNally, in 2003. Other high-profile representative of this Atlantis localization is a molecular biologist Sunil Prasannan, who has contributed to a number of internet forums relating to Atlantis. Zia Abbas in his book Atlantis, The Final Solution in 2002 claims to prove that Plato's Atlantis is to be found on the continental shelf in the South China Sea, known as Sundaland. In 2013, Danny Hill Magnotavijaya in his book Plato Never Lied, Atlantis is in Indonesia, stated that the Gunung Padang Pyramid in the province of West Java was apparently brought by people in pyramid form about 13,000 years ago. The adoption of Atlantis in the greater of the present-day Indonesia located. Graham Hancock proposed a common origin for various architectural and artistic works in pre-cataclysmic Sundaland as the true location of Atlantis, in his book Magicians of the Gods, published in 2015. Further support for an Indonesian Atlantis is the publication of a book, Atlantis, The Lost City is in Java Sea by Donnie Irwanta in April 2015, who endeavors to identify features of the lost city with details in Plato's account with the site in the Java Sea off the coast of the island of Kalimantan. In overall, Donnie Irwanta has collected 60 converging evidence to conclude that Atlantis matched the characteristics of Sundaland, as well as its capital city is most likely located in the Java Sea. What we call now by the name of Atlantic Ocean is not the same as that of the ancients. Herodotus, Aristotle, Plato, Strabo, and several other ancient authors are very specific on the fact that the Atlantic Ocean was the whole of the coterminous Earth-encircling ocean, which we now arbitrarily divide into Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans. The phrase, at a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, implies that Atlantis was far away in the ocean, in what we know today, the Eastern Indian Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean. Plato is alleged to have embodied the Athens as part of the story of Atlantis. the allegation of embodiment is supported by the expressions as follows. The state of Atlantis is located at a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean by itself. Put the city of the Athens at a distant location as well, since both regions were close together, as told in the story. The Atlantis and the Athens were bordered by monuments of Heracles, which among others were placed in a strait called the Strait of Heracles. The city of Atlantis was within the strait, meaning that the city of the Athens was outside of the strait and the sea. These geographic descriptions are not compatible to the existence of Atlantis around the Mediterranean Sea. The statements that the Athens, which formerly had a vast and fertile land, at the time of Solon had sunk all around. All that remains were small rocky parts, only a few trees growing, and consists almost entirely of bare land, so that rainwater flows only just on it, and then lost to the sea. Do not describe the conditions of the city of Athens at the time of Solon. The statement that the city of Athens had been established 1,000 years before Egypt is also incompatible. The sea level at the time of Atlantis, about 11,600 years ago, was approximately 60 meters below the present-day sea level. The Plato's expression that Atlantis was the way to other islands, and from there might pass to the opposite continent, which encompasses the true ocean, precisely points to Sunderland. Traveling further from there, one may reach some islands like Nusa Tenggara, Sulawesi, Maluku, Mindanao, and Luzon, and may pass the opposite continent, that was the large South continent, combining Australia, Papua, and the land connecting them. The land of Atlantis is larger than Libya and Asia Minor, also precisely affirms its size. The expression that the region on the side of the ocean was said to be very lofty and precipitous further confirms the Sunderland location of Atlantis. The expression, inside a strait and in a sea, encircled by a boundless continent, confirms its capital location. It is said that Atlantis had, sun in the above, benefit of the annual rainfall, abundance of water, excellently a temperate climate, and summer and winter seasons. These are strongly characterized a tropical climate. Summer and winter refer to the dry and wet seasons, which were non-existent words in the ancient Greece. Atlantis had, full of rich earth, abundance of wood, cultivation by true farmers, noble nature, best soil in the world, abundance of animals, coconuts, spice products, and 2 harvests each year. These are the true natural characteristics of the region in Sunderland. The abundance of food and wood was needed to sustain more than 20 million population, to create more than 1 million soldiers, and to build more than 200 ships, which was not possible in the other parts of the world during the era. Plato also mentions that there was provision for all other sorts of animals, both for those which live in lakes, and marshes, and rivers, and also for those which live in mountains, and on plains. So there was for the animal which is the largest and most voracious of all. Large species, such as tiger, rhinoceros, orangutan, elephant, and leopard, exist in the region, which are among almost 1,000 mammal species inhabiting this region. Besides those, there are almost 1,000 of bird species and more than 1,000 of fish species. It is described that there were a great number of elephants in Atlantis. 2 of the 4 subspecies of Asian elephants are found in Indonesia and Malaysia. The Sumatran elephant is found on the island of Sumatra, and the Kalimantan elephant on the island of Kalimantan. The now extinct Javan elephant, those once inhabited Java, are identical to the Kalimantan elephant. Plato mentions that there are horses, for races or for warfare. The different breeds of native Indonesian horses are slender, but still strong and sturdy, so they deserve to be called ponies than horses. The ponies have continually been infused with additional bloods, mostly Arabian, to improve their quality, so that it can be expected that the indigenous breeds were slenderer and shorter than what we can see now. Plato describes that there were plenty of bulls sacrificed. Indigenous Southeast Asian bulls are known as banteng. They have been domesticated in several places, used as working animals and for their meat. What is meant by Plato for bulls could probably be the water buffaloes native to Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Common people generally could not distinguish between bull and water buffalo. Plato does not recognize water buffalo, but beast resembling the bull, because the animals were not found in the ancient Greece and its surroundings. Plato says that there were 100 nereids riding on dolphins. Most species of dolphins live in shallow areas of tropical and warmer waters, thus constitute the ideal conditions for the seas after the drowning of Sunderland, such as the Java and South China Seas. Plato mentions that there were fruits having a hard rind, affording drinks, meats, and ointments in Atlantis. Those fruits are no other than coconuts. Coconut has a long and respected history among cultures in the regions of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the Pacific. DNA analysis reveals that coconuts were first cultivated in islands Southeast Asia, meaning the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and perhaps the continent as well. Coconuts were introduced to the Indian Ocean a couple of thousand years ago by ancient Austronesians establishing trade routes connecting Southeast Asia to Madagascar and coastal East Africa. Coconut genetics also preserve a record of prehistoric trade routes and of the colonization of the Americas. Plato mentions that there are fruits which spoil with keeping, with which we console ourselves after dinner in Atlantis. This could be a traditional fermented food, eaten as a dessert, locally known as tape. Tape is indigenous and popular throughout Southeast Asia. It is a sweet or sour alcoholic paste, and can be used directly as a food, or in traditional recipes. Tape can be made from a variety of carbohydrate sources, but typically from cassava, white rice, or glutinous rice. Fermentation is performed by a variety of molds, by inoculating a carbohydrate source with the required microorganisms, in a starter culture, locally known as ragi, and yeasts, along with bacteria. Tape is also used to make alcoholic beverages, locally known as arak, or brem. Plato mentions that there are roots, or herbage, or woods, or essences which distill from fruit and flower. This could be the herbal medicine made from natural materials, locally known as jamu, or mixtures of spices or seasoning, known as bumbu. There was fruit, which admits of cultivation, both the dry sort, which is given us for nourishment, and any other, which we use for food. He called them all by the common name, pulse. This could be the paddy or rice, which is the staple food of the region. There are chestnuts and the like, which furnish pleasure and amusement. This could be coffee, which grows well in this region. Atlantis had abundance of minerals, gold, silver, copper, tin, and orichalcum. These are also true natural characteristics of the region. What is orichalcum? Orichalcum was unknown to Greek, being more precious in those days than anything except gold, and flashed with the red light, or like fire. The author identified orichalcum as the zircon, as they have the same characteristics as the descriptions. The zircon products are really valuable second to gold. They have gemstone quality, and are popular as diamond simulant. Zircon can be processed to bring out different colors. The red one is known as the hyacinth. When finished, its nature is sparkling like diamond, that metals do not possess, which why Plato describes it with the words, flashed and light, in particular. No known metal shines and flashed with the red color, or like fire, thus orichalcum is not a metal. The expression that it was dug out of the earth in many parts of the land is true, as it is abundant in the region of Kalimantan. Plato describes that there was a level plain, smooth and even, descended towards the sea, surrounded by mountains celebrated for their number, size and beauty, looked towards the south and sheltered from the north, and with wealthy villages of country folk, rivers, lakes and meadows. There was a plain near the capital city of Atlantis, matching the characteristics of the region in southern Kalimantan, in which a part is now submerged under the Java Sea. The plain has slopes mostly less than 1%, declining southward to the Java Sea, and no visible mount on the whole plain. It is open on the south, and sheltered by the Muller-Schwaner and Meratus mountains at the north, mostly covered by primary forest, inhabited by enormous kinds of animals, and as the home of tens of native Dayak tribes. It has high rainfall and warm temperature over the year, many large rivers and tributaries, so that it is very fertile, and rich of food and daily necessity resources. Plato explains that the plain was rectangular and oblong in shape, 3,000 stadia or about 555 kilometers long, and 2,000 stadia or about 370 kilometers wide. The shape of the plain, in the region of southern Kalimantan and the adjacent Java Sea, is rectangular at the south and oblong at the north, almost exactly 555 kilometers long, and 370 kilometers wide. Concerning the waterways on the plain, Plato describes that the perimeter canal was 100 feet, or about 30 meters deep, 1 stadium, or about 185 meters wide, 10,000 stadia, or about 1,850 kilometers long, carried round the whole plain, received streams from the mountains, winding around the plain, meeting at the city and let off into the sea. Plato describes that the inland canals were straight, 100 feet or about 30 meters wide, 100 stadia or about 18.5 kilometers intervals, and led off into the perimeter canal. There were waterways on the plain, matching the characteristics of the region. The rivers of Barito, Kapuas Moru, Kahayan, and Sabangao, found in the region, are identified as those canals. They are originated from the Muller-Schwaner and Meratus mountains. These rivers are about 600 to 800 meters wide and 8 meters deep in average. Flooding and sedimentation of the rivers on a very flat plain over the past 11,600 years have changed their regimes. Interchanges of flows and orders among them might also occur. However, in general view, their straightness and elongation are preserved until today, that are parallel to each other and in the north-south direction. calculating the conveying capacity, that is the area times the velocity, and assuming the same flow velocity because of the same gravitational energy slope, the cross-section area of the flow, that is the width times the depth, as described by Plato, is about 185 times 30 equals 5,550 square meters, while the area today is, amazingly, almost precise, 700 in average times 8 equals 5,600 square meters. The average distance of these rivers is approximately 20 kilometers, also considered in close agreement to the figure of 18.5 kilometers by Plato. Plato mentions that there are transverse passages cut from one inland canal into another. Looking at the maps, we can see numerous existing transverse passages in the region. Some of them were built or rehabilitated in recent times. The passage is known locally as Angier, a canal linking two rivers, as part of the transportation network. Most of the rivers in southern Kalimantan are navigable. These rivers, and all their tributaries, are a network of transportation system, become very important means for the people, and has been the economic lifeblood, because most of their economic activities are carried out through and in the rivers since the ancient time. Various types of forest, mining, and agricultural products are transported to collection points or ports through the river network. Plato mentions that there are irrigation streams taking from the canals, supplied water to the land in summer, or dry season, but rainfall in the winter, or rainy season, yielding 2 crops in a year. Today's practices of tidal swamp irrigation system in southern Kalimantan is traditionally known as the Angier system, where primary canals called Angier or Antasan were constructed connecting 2 tidal rivers, also used as navigation purposes. Inland canals were built to irrigate and drain the fields from and to the Angier. Secondary canals called Hondil or Tata and tertiary canals called Sika. During low tides, the canals drained the toxic water, while during high tides, fresh water enters the canals and conveyed to the fields. The system yields 2 rice crops in a year. All these facts are completely consistent with the Plato's expressions. Plato said that the capital island, where there was a city, with the citadel and rings of water, was in a real sea, inside a strait, surrounded by a boundless continent. The boundless continent is the Sundaland attached to the Asian continent, and the only sea surrounded by it in those days was the ancient Java Sea, suggesting that the capital island and city are located in the Java Sea. The statement that the island was located near the plain, and all the canals met at the city and drained into the sea, suggesting that the island is located south of the plain, in a place now under the Java Sea. The site is identified by the sailors as Gosongia, or Annie Florence Reef, a coral reef described as small in extent and dries at low water. The city of Atlantis was an island with a small hill near its center. The city and the island existed long enough for many kings to develop it. It had rings of water and a passage from the sea to the inner ring. They bridged over the zones of sea which surrounded the ancient metropolis. A stone wall began at the sea and went all round. They used orichalcum, tin, and brass or bronze to cover the outer walls of their cities. There was a hill, not too high, near the middle of the center island. At the top of the central hill, a temple was built to honor Poseidon, which housed the giant gold statue of him. They built the palace and the habitation of the god and of their ancestors, which they continued to ornament in successive generations. The later docks had triremes and many naval supplies. The phrase, "for which reason, the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a reef of mud or clay in the way," confirms the location. Coral reef is scarce in the Mediterranean, so that the Greeks and the Egyptians did not own the term. Then Plato wrote it as a reef of mud or clay. Coral reefs grow best in warm, shallow, clear, sunny, and agitated waters, and on hard, underwater surfaces, thus constitute the ideal conditions for the Java Sea. It is confirmed further by the phrase, caused by the subsidence of the island, as the growth of the coral reef was caused by the sea level rise during the last glacial period. The sea level kept rising until about 6,000 years ago. Corals grew on the solid structures. Along with sedimentation and other processes. Today, there is an existing coral reef, named Gozongia, or Annie Florence Reef, in the Java Sea. The top of the reef is about 10 meters below the average sea level, and the surrounding seabed is about 55 meters below the average sea level. The city structures are still apparent from the patterns of the reefs. The depth of the sea here exactly coincides with the land level about 11,600 years ago. However, further investigations are required to find out what are inside the coral reef. Plato mentions that the war was said to have taken place between those who dwelt outside the monuments of Heracles and all who dwelt within them. Heracles is a name borrowed from the Greek mythology. What does the monuments of Heracles really mean? The Egyptian priest told Solon about the territorial boundary between Atlantis and its opponent as, which are by you called the monuments of Heracles, to describe a state entrance or boundary markers which were situated in a strait. The words, bayou, could mean that the markers were commonly known by the Athenian but not necessarily what they referred to, or in other words, like the monuments of Heracles. As mentioned before, the Atlantean boundary is not compatible with the Mediterranean region. Moreover, Solon borrows Greek mythological terms in the story. Classical Greek writers frequently refer to the monuments without being in any way specific regarding their location. The poet Pindar would appear to have treated the monuments as a metaphor for the limit of established Greek geographical knowledge, a boundary that was never static. The monuments were, in earlier times, identified with the Strait of Sicily, but from the time of Eratosthenes, circa 250 BC, the metaphor was moved to refer to the Strait of Gibraltar, reflecting the expansion of the Greek maritime knowledge. The author hypothesizes that the monuments are monuments built at places on state entrances or boundary line, and could be anywhere at certain places along the boundary. The monument is locally known as Tugu, which has been the tradition in Indonesia until now to mark the boundary or entrances of a region. The monuments are often decorated with gargoyle-like faces of the god Kala, which are ubiquitous in Java and Bali. It will be discussed later that the god, Kala, is analogous with the Greek, Heracles. Balayan Island, off in the Java Sea, is a prototype of the island of Atlantis, as it has the same environment, geological formation, and tectonic processes, as well as they are closely situated. Balayan and Atlantis Islands are both located on a geological arc, identified by the geologists as Balayan Arc. It is described that they had springs, one of cold and another of hot water. There are several hot and cold springs in the Balayan Island, resulted from the tectonic activities in the region. That descriptions. The stones were quarried from the center island and the zones, with white, black, and red colors, and they hollowed out double docks, having roofs formed out of the native rock, are also noticeable. The stones are apparently similar to the igneous rock deposited in the Balayan Island, having the acidic white, alkaline black grade, and ferroxide red rocks. This igneous rock is hard and strong, having enough natural strength to stand as roofs of the hollowed-out double docks. The kingdom of Atlantis was founded by a god named Poseidon, borrowed from the Greek myth. The land was divided into 10 portions, given to his children. There was a holy temple dedicated to Poseidon and his wife, Plato, in the center of the citadel. Poseidon is one of the 12 Olympian deities of the pantheon in the Greek mythology. His main domain is the ocean, so that he is called the god of the sea, who rides on sea creatures that resemble horses. In the earliest works of the ancient Greek literature, Poseidon is more widely known than Zeus, and was regarded as the supreme god, as mentioned in linear B tablets from the pre-Olympians Greek Bronze Age. Homer, in the Iliad, calls him as the protector of the Hellenic cities. Poseidon is analogous to Nethune in the Etruscan civilization around the 1st century BC, which is also called the god of the sea. In Latin language, the name was transformed into Neptune in the Roman mythology. Neptune is depicted as a god who drives sea creatures resembling dragon-tailed horses and armed with a trident, like Poseidon. This shows the strong influence of Greek mythology. Plato explains that the 10 kings were said to have the absolute control of the citizens by the enforcement of the law, regulated by the commands of Poseidon, which had handed it down. The Greek Poseidon is analogous to god Varuna or Varuna in the Nusantara archipelago, which given the title of the water god, the ruler of the seas and oceans. In pre-Dharmic mythology, Varuna was considered as the supreme god against the others, and the first law founder of the world. Varuna is depicted as riding a sea monster called Makara, and which on the front resembling a beast with large teeth and tusks, and on the back in the form of a giant dragon's tail, occasionally legged. In Indian mythology, the Makara is described as an inland creature in the front half, such as deer, crocodile, or elephant, and an aquatic creature in the back half, such as fish or seal, or occasionally peacock's tail or flower. Of these things, the author concludes that Poseidon and Varuna are analogous, evidence that both of them are the gods of the seas or oceans, became the first law founders, constituted the supreme gods in the early time, and drive mythological sea creatures. Besides some other names, Kalimantan bore the name of Varunapura, means the land of the god Varuna. The old Javanese chronicle, Nagara Kri Tagama, mentions an ancient state that was within the Majapahit spheres of influence, called Brunei, later identified as Brunei, a kingdom of the modern Brunei. European sources further in the 16th century showed the name of the island as Brunei, by Antonio Pigafetta, or Bornai, by Duarte Barbosa. Chinese chronicles in the Song and Ming dynasties showed the name Boni. The Dutch and British colonials named the island as Borneo. This is another conclusion that Kalimantan or Borneo, which was once the island of the god Baruna, is analogous to the island of Poseidon, and related to the existence of Atlantis in the region. Heracles, or Romanized as Hercules, is the son of the affair Zeus had with the mortal woman Alcmene. Zeus seduced and made love to Alcmene after disguising himself as her husband, Amphitryon, the king of Thebes. Zeus swore that the next son born of the Perseid house should become ruler of Greece, but by a trick of Zeus's jealous wife, Hera, another child, the sickly Eurystheus, was born first and became king. When Heracles grew up, he had to serve him, and also suffer the vengeful persecution of Hera. Besides these Hera-induced frenzies, Heracles was a very brutal character. The Greek Heracles is analogous to god Kala in the Nusantara archipelago. Kala is the god of the underworld in the ancient Javanese and Balinese mythology. According to the Javanese legend, Kala is the son of Guru. Guru has a very beautiful wife, named Juma. One day, Guru, in a fit of uncontrolled lust, forced himself on Juma. They had sexual intercourse on top of his Andini, a divine cow. This behavior was ashamed Juma, who then cursed Guru, but Guru cursed back Juma, so she appeared as a fearsome and ugly ogre. This fierce form of Juma is also known in Javanese mythology as Durga. From this relationship, Kala was born with the appearance of an ogre. Kala is described as having an insatiable appetite, and being very rude. He was sent by the Deva to earth to punish humans for their evil habits. However, Kala was interested only in devouring humans to satisfy his appetite. Alarmed, the Deva then recalled Kala from the earth. He later became ruler of the underworld. The analogy of Kala and Heracles is that each of them is the son of a supreme god, either Guru or Zeus. Their births were outrageous. Kala was born from an uncontrolled lust of Guru on Yuma, while Heracles was from a seduction of Zeus on Alcmene. They are having insatiable appetites, and being very rude, brutal, and violent in their whole lives. From the ancient until present day, gargoyle-like faces of Kala are often found at temple entrances, boundary monuments, welcome monuments, gates, doorway, niches, furniture, wall hangings and traditional musical instruments, ubiquitous in Java and Bali. Similar figures are also found at the Dayak houses. As previously discussed, the boundary monuments decorated with the Kala faces are analogous to the monuments of Heracles. Apart from those, Zeus, the father or Heracles, and Guru, the father of Kala, are also analogous. Both of them were then appointed to the supreme gods, replacing either Poseidon or Varuna. Note also the analogy and phonetic similarities between the names Kala and Kleos, Guru and Zu, Yuma with Alcmene, and Durga with Hera. Plato describes that, in every 5 or 6 years alternately, the kings of Atlantis gathered to discuss and make arrangements topped off with plenty of bulls sacrifice. Common people generally could not distinguish between bull and water buffalo. Plato does not recognize water buffalo, but beast resembling the bull, because the animals were not found in the ancient Greece and its surroundings. Water buffalo, also called Asian buffalo or Asiatic buffalo, is a large bovine native to Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Water buffalo is one of the animals of greatest economic and religious value, used as a sacrificial victim in Southeast Asia, Indian subcontinent, and southern China. In these monsoon regions of Asia, buffaloes are offered in sacrifice to divinities or divine spirits, as the carrier of dead souls to the world beyond, or of some orphic symbol of the ancestors. A characteristic of Southeast Asian houses is the forked horn on the roof, which is considered to be a symbol of the buffalo, regarded throughout the region as a link between heaven and this world. The construction of stone pyramids was based on native belief that mountains and other high places are the abode of the spirits of the ancestors, or the most ideal pilgrimage places to worship them. The simplest form of pyramid is the earth and stone step pyramids, in which it is normally built on natural or man-made mounds, hills or hillsides. Usually there is a shrine and/or an altar at the top. Austronesian megalithic culture in Nusantara features an earth and stone step pyramid structure referred to as Pundan Berendak. Pundan Berendak is regarded as one of the characteristics of the original culture of the archipelago. Pyramid structures have been found and spread throughout Southeast Asia. Most of them are found in the island of Java. The huge Burl Buddha temple is the largest Buddhist temple in the world, which allegedly built on the previous step pyramid. The Saku and Chathal temples in central Java, where the dates are still debated, show the Austronesian indigenous earth and stone step pyramids that somewhat resemble Mesoamerican pyramids. Ganin Padang is the biggest and the oldest megalithic site in Southeast Asia, dated circa 23,000 BC or older. As the civilizations were developing, they built larger pyramids so that more stones were required. The majority of the weight are closer to the ground, and material higher up on the pyramid will be pushing down from above. The stones could pose problems on the strength of the earth to hold the weight. Therefore, pyramids with heavier stone weight pushing on the earth fill are observed to have less earth fill or even without it. Pyramids have been built by civilizations in many parts of the world. For thousands of years, the largest structures on Earth were pyramids. They spread from Egypt to America, that emerged separately from one another by oceans who supposedly never discovered each other's existence. There are no firmly established connections between the different civilizations that built them, but their similarities show that they sprang from a common origin. As said by Plato, the Temple of Poseidon was built in the center island, which was a hill, encircled by rings of waters. To reach the temple from the innermost ring of water, steps on the hill slope were definitely required. This could mean that the temple is featuring an earth and stone step pyramid structure, characterizes the original culture of Nusantara that is referred to as Pundan Berendak. The temple was also the place to worship their ancestors. Plato describes that the canals were means for transporting wood and products in ships. They brought down the wood from the mountains to the city and conveyed the products of the earthen ships. The canal and the largest of the harbors were full of the vessels and merchants coming from all parts. The docks were full of triremes and naval stores. They had a fleet of as many as 1,200 ships. Maritime activity is a typical Austronesian culture since the ancient time. The earliest known evidences are found as cave paintings dated back to 10,000 years or older. Those are fully decorated by sailboat paintings. Long-distance sailing technology in the region must have appeared much earlier, with the peopling of Australia through Southeast Asia some 40,000 years ago. Archaeologists have revealed ample evidence of the active maritime networks in the Southeast Asia region that spread throughout all of insular Southeast Asia and most of the Pacific. Plato describes that Atlantis was a great and magnificent kingdom that had vast powers. Atlantis can be said to be an advanced civilization of its time and had a variety of superior technologies compared to other countries. Gunung Padang Pyramid in Java is the oldest known structure of any kind on Earth. dated to as early as 25,000 years ago. The pyramid would be proof of an advanced ancient civilization. The majority of the stepped site is man-made, built by generations over a matter of millennia. The so many rock paintings depicting sailboats in Southeast Asia, dated to as early as 40,000 years ago, would also prove that such technology has been mastered from the early time. This technology had been inherited by the Austronesian people and the Thalassacracies, or maritime kingdoms, such as Srivijaya and Majapahit. The Bugis and Makassar people from the island of Sulawesi are renowned for making a wooden sailing vessel called the Pinisi. The kingdoms in Southeast Asia developed an advanced stonemason architectural technology and building of temples. This includes the magnificent Borobudur, Prambanan, Angkor Wat, and many other couple hundreds of temples. In agriculture, the people in Southeast Asia are famous for paddy cultivation and techniques such as terracing. Local systems of complex irrigation and water management have been developed in the archipelago. An exceptional example is Subak, the irrigation system of Bali. In food technology, due in part to the tropical climate teeming with various microbes, the people in Southeast Asia have developed traditional knowledge in fermentation techniques, which resulted in the development of fermented foods such as tape, tempeh, ancham, and also beverages like bram and tuak. Plato describes the Atlantis was a powerful and advanced kingdom that destructed, in a night and a day, 9,000 years before Solon, or about 11,600 years ago. This accurately coincided with the cataclysm at the end of the Younger Dryas period. At the end of the Younger Dryas period, around 11,600 years ago, the weight of the ice shifted to the seas triggered cracks in the Earth's crust to move, that set off cataclysm. Earthquakes, volcano eruptions, superwaves and floods engulfed the coastal cultures and all the flat continental shelves of Sunderland, and wiped out many populations. As the sea rolled in, there was a mass migration of the survivors from the sinking continent. Plato mentioned that the island of Atlantis was beset, in a night and a day, by an earthquake and a flood. In some other his explanations, it is implied that the flood was coming from the sea, so the possibility is a tsunami. Plato did not recognize tsunami, so he equated it to flood. Earthquakes and tsunamis are very often correlated. Frequent and significant earthquakes, tsunamis and volcano eruptions took place in one of the most complex tectonic regions on Earth. Tsunami are known for their dramatic run-up heights, can also be excited or amplified in height considerably in shallow waters and on flat plains, and can oscillate back and forth within harbors and bays. We can speculate that the destruction of Atlantis was among others caused by a tsunami in this region. It was due to the tsunami waves traveling in shallow water that was the ancient Java Sea and penetrated inland on a very flat plain. The ancient Java Sea was forming a gulf, which could cause a wave became much higher and prolonged and destructive. Plato describes that the lands of Atlantis and the Athens were sunken ceaselessly afterwards. This is in line with the recent knowledge of post-glacial sea level rise. The sea level kept on rising until about 6,000 years ago, sinking the lowlands as well as low plains in Sunderland. The ruin of the Atlantis city and its story were buried forever under the sea. Then, it was remembered by the Egyptians who migrated from there, and wrote them on their sacred registers.